Hello, my name is Mariah Barnhart. I'd like to sue the federal government, and I'm hoping that you'll help. When my daughter was diagnosed with brain cancer at the age of 2, I quickly discovered how little rights and options I had in her care. She declined quickly, being resuscitated, rushed into emergency surgeries, and started on harsh chemotherapies that came with a laundry list of side effects, including death. She suffered immensely, sores from the tips of her lips down her entire GI tract, drooling blood, atrophy of her legs and unable to walk, only sleeping when she'd finally screamed and writhed in pain long enough to knock her little body out. She was too young to understand why the person who'd fed her, cuddled her, loved her, and comforted her had suddenly turned against her, letting these strangers torture her. I imagine she was constantly trying to figure out what she'd done wrong or bad, how she could fix it and get us to stop tormenting her. Too young to know we were trying to help her, to save her. It was clear that if the disease didn't kill her, the treatment would. The only thing worse than the death of a child would be them suffering in torturous fear and pain on their journey to a heartbreakingly early death. Despite having every medicine on the face of the earth available to her at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, nothing was helping. And the only thing I hadn't tried yet was cannabis, because it was illegal. All other measures had been exhausted, and I had no other choice but to become a criminal or let her suffer. And any mother knows what choice I made. We quickly found out that cannabis was the only thing that helped alleviate her suffering. It helped her sleep, it helped her nausea, her vomiting, it kept her from having to get a feeding tube, and before long she'd regained her strength, the atrophy in her legs dissipated, and she started walking again. Most importantly, she was out of pain and was happy to wake up in the morning. It renewed her will to live and ultimately helped save her life. In fact, her doctor was so impressed with what we witnessed that she left St. Jude to head up cannabis research in other states. Which brings me to the point that our zip code should not dictate whether or not we suffer, whether or not our children suffer, and whether or not we have choices in our health care and the medical care of our children. Politicians should not be trying to be physicians, and this should be a first option, not a last resort. No other child should suffer needlessly because their parents don't have choices to help them or access to what will help them. In the moment, we'd been backed into a dark corner, and all anyone was worried about was alleviating her suffering. But now that she was doing well and feeling well, we had time to step back and take it all in, and it hit us all over again how immense the risks were. Giving her cannabis in an illegal state was putting me at risk of being imprisoned and having her taken by the state to endure cancer treatment scared and alone. So we moved to Colorado, where I did her chemo at home, and brought mothers from across the country to fight for our rights as parents, and in our home state to help legalize cannabis as medicine in Florida, where we could be home with family and friends without being criminals. As a patriot and coming from a long line of military families, I had no idea that our freedom was just an illusion. How bizarre that right here in America, our access to one of nature's safest, most effective medicines that could literally grow in your backyard like a weed is dependent upon your zip code and state lines. Some states use federal law as an excuse not to have legal programs in their states, which leads to unregulated markets that pave the way for organized criminal enterprises that use illicit profits to fund things like child sex trafficking rings. On these unregulated markets, it's not uncommon to find edible products made to look like candy, which increases the likelihood of kids accessing it. The prohibition of cannabis is the leading cause of no-knock raids, which are often conducted on wrong homes or with bad information. And these raids are exceedingly dangerous for both the officers and the residents of these neighborhoods, where innocent children have been injured and even killed in their own beds. And then there are the parents that have lost children to the opioid and overdose epidemics, which are directly linked to the war on drugs, which is built upon cannabis prohibition. Even in legal states, parents like myself are still at risk of losing our children, imprisonment, and federal law enforcement. If insanity is repeating the same actions, expecting a different outcome, and we know the ravages of cannabis prohibition continue to mount with every passing year, at what point do we say enough is enough? We will not continue to let our liberty be stolen for perceived safety that we can see is a lie. We will not continue to let politicians and pharmaceutical companies profit off the suffering of our children. This brings us to the discussion of federal legalization of cannabis in America. Cannabis is currently listed as a Schedule I drug, which defines it as the most dangerous type of drug on the planet, with no medicinal benefits. For context, heroin is another Schedule I drug. President Clinton quietly signed a patent application on behalf of the United States government in the early 1990s for cannabinoids as antioxidants and neuroprotectants, with federal funding quietly being sent to Israel for cannabis research, while they refused to move it from Schedule I. Science has always disputed the scheduling, and we have known cannabis has medicinal benefits for thousands of years, confirmed by the formal research that the U.S. has been paying for overseas for decades. But with information now available to anyone and everyone, we finally see past the political corruption. Americans now know beyond any shadow of a doubt that we were lied to and that cannabis is not dangerous and has a myriad of health benefits. But what no one seems to be talking about is that we're under several global treaties, and the most we can currently do federally would be to place cannabis in Schedule II of the Controlled Substance Act, alongside cocaine and meth. And this would put cannabis directly into the hands of pharmaceutical companies. And pharmaceutical companies only. Effectively, the exact solution the government and corporations have been working toward. We've been hopeful someone would start working toward addressing these issues, the global treaties, but with so many legislative bills being introduced in Washington, D.C. in recent years as marketing ploys and symbolic gestures that don't actually solve anything, like the recent hyperbolic headlines about pardons that release 0 prisoners, we're no longer confident it's being addressed. Again, under these global treaties, we cannot deschedule or legalize cannabis federally. Therefore, as we work toward modifying or breaking from these treaties, our best next step is to relinquish federal oversight of state laws, similar to the recent abortion suit that overturned Roe v. Wade. Fight fire with fire. As a single mom of a cancer fighter, I personally spent over $100,000 creating the first nonprofit for parents like myself, Cannamoms, helping other families like ours across the globe, and lobbying for medical cannabis laws, both federally and in several individual states. Wise Florida and our partners have invested over $125,000 since last year working towards ending prohibition in Florida. Voter initiatives in states like ours, where our representatives refuse to fulfill the will of the people, are upwards of dozens of millions of dollars. But this isn't just about my daughter or even families like ours. This is about all Americans. This is about personal freedoms and ending government tyranny. We need to relinquish federal oversight of state laws. We need to win a lawsuit against the federal government that says as much. I hope you'll help us, because I've learned in recent years that it really does take a village, and we're building ours. Our village that believes in personal freedoms, fighting government tyranny, getting the government out of our homes, and having rights in our health care and options in the care of our suffering children. The war on drugs is a multi-billion-dollar war. It's the deadliest and most expensive war America has ever waged. It's a war the American government has waged against its own people, and it's only getting worse. Freedom in America has been just an illusion for far too long, and it's going to take every single one of us to make freedom a reality again. Millions have been poured into ending cannabis prohibition in America to no avail. We need to bring everyone and all of our resources together at one time in one place for the right mission. And that's why the moms are here. As we know, wars are expensive. The pharmaceutical companies aren't going to fund it. Corporate America isn't going to fund it. In fact, we're going to have a lot of powerful people with a lot of money fighting us tooth and nail. If we're going to do this, it's going to take all of us coming together. Cannabis is no longer just about cannabis. It's a litmus test and a representation of real freedom here in America. We hope you'll fight with us. Thank you.